morning and welcome to Sunday School at Second Baptist. I'm glad you could join me this morning. Our lesson today, the title of our lesson today is Accepting Discipline. And the sentence that is right under the title says, God uses discipline from society, family, and others to shape his people. And so we're going to be looking in chapter 29 of the book of Proverbs this morning. If you have your Bible, you might open to that, chapter 29 of Proverbs. And just to give a little background on this part of the Proverbs, back in the day when David was king of Israel, Israel was a united nation, and then Solomon was his son who ruled, and these are the words that came from Solomon, or from God through Solomon for us. Most of the Proverbs is that. But at a certain point after Solomon had ruled, I won't go deep into the history of all of it, but the nation of Israel was divided, and so you had the nation of Israel, and then you had Judah. They became two, and so then a large number of people were taken off into captivity. And you can read all of this in the book of Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, if you want to study more about both Israel and Judah, because the history of both is there in those books during this time. And so then I'm going to focus now on the kings of Judah, and there's a purpose I'm getting to. I'll get to a point in a minute. And so you come down through the kings of Judah until you get to Hezekiah, King Hezekiah. And Hezekiah, his father was called Ahaz. Ahaz was a very wicked king and did so many things wrong that I won't go into all of the things that Ahaz did, but some of them were extremely wicked that he did, including child sacrifices and things like that, taking parts of the worship furnishings of the temple and moving those over to his house, and just lots of things. And you can read all about that in the Kings and the Chronicles. But then along came Hezekiah, and Hezekiah was a king that tried to do right, where the temple had been closed down and basically not used for several kings. I'll put it that way. Hezekiah came in and he refurbished and tried to open up the temple, and in the process of doing these things that Hezekiah did, he also gathered some of the sayings of Solomon that had been misplaced and not written down, and he gathered those and was sure to get those into the body of the sayings of Solomon. And so this that we have today to be able to study this is thanks to Hezekiah, because this is a part of what he gathered and put together, the writings of Solomon. So that's just a little bit of the background of how these verses came to be in our Bible. The Bible is interesting because it was written down by many, many different men, but God inspired them to write, and so the things they wrote were from God, because they were inspired to write these things. And it's really miraculous to think about how all of these different things survived and were gathered into the book that we have now, that we can study and we can learn things. And I'm sure that there may have been things over the years that didn't make it because they were destroyed or misplaced or whatever when the captivity happened and those things. But we trust that the things that God intended to be here are here for us. And knowing that there's so much more to God than just what's written in the pages of these books. He is much more complex than that and not limited to these things, but we can at least get a glimpse of what God is like and his attributes and know better how to follow him because we have the Bible. So we're thankful for that. Okay, let's jump in to talk about discipline now. There's a couple different things that come to mind when you think of discipline. You think of punishment. Some people think of punishment. If you've been disciplined in the military or by your parents, then a lot of times that may have been a punitive thing, that you were punished for some reason. But discipline, we also think of a person who is self-disciplined. So what is self-discipline? That means that you have worked on your own self to cause yourself to do things in the right way. So you didn't have someone else to discipline you, you disciplined yourself. But discipline is not just punishment, it's guidance. I think of it as guidance to do what is right. And so if we think of it in that way, it takes a little bit of a different tone. And that is what we do with our children as they're growing up. We guide them. And even when they are adults, we give guidance. Not necessarily that they have to take our guidance, because each person at a certain point has to begin to live their life and make their decisions. And hopefully they still base that on our guidance to a certain extent. But then we are no longer responsible in the sense of, they are responsible for their own life at a certain point. They are adults, and they begin to make decisions that we might not necessarily agree with, but we have to support them in doing so, knowing that they have to live their own life and be answerable for it. So let's look at the first little section now, Proverbs 29, verses 1, 2, and 3. A man who hardens his neck after much reproof will suddenly be broken beyond remedy. When the righteous increase, the people rejoice, but when a wicked man rules, people groan. A man who loves wisdom makes his father glad. So that third one there, third verse, a man who loves wisdom makes his father glad. We would all agree with that. As we see our children grow up and they make good decisions, and sometimes even better decisions than we might have made in the past, or they think up things that we would have never thought of, but it's a good decision. It makes us so proud to see them do those things and to know that they're making their way through the world and in a good way. But let's go back to verse 1. It says a man who hardens his neck, or maybe you think of a stiff-necked person. That's a person who is inflexible, not willing to listen to others maybe, not willing to change his ways. Then it says, after much reproof, he will suddenly be broken beyond remedy. And another meaning for that is, or in my Bible it says, or there is no remedy, for him. He'll be broken and there's not going to be a remedy. So, in other words, it says that there will be many reprimands or much reproof. God gives us these opportunities to change our ways if we become stiff-necked, and God is patient and gives us a chance to change, just like we would with our children. But after a certain point, then it says that this man will be broken beyond remedy. And I think that is probably the way God works with us, if we think about it. That He is patient. The Bible says God is patient. And He doesn't give any of us what we deserve. Definitely. If He gave us what we deserve, none of us would survive it. Because we are, in general, a wicked group. And we can't please Him no matter how hard we try. So that's where mercy comes in. And God's mercy, that He does not give us what we deserve. But He does give us chances to be reprimanded and to listen to Him and to change our ways. But at a certain point, the chances may end, and then we're left to our own devices, which is not going to be good for us. And if we think about that, you know, the thing that pops into my mind is, for example, a terrorist who has done something wicked to try to blow something up or kill people. You think, well, why doesn't God just extinguish that person? We used to hear comments like that about Osama bin Laden. Why doesn't God just strike him with a lightning bolt and be done with it? And that verse, you know, came to mind, and I'm sorry I don't have the reference here, that God is patient, who doesn't want anyone to perish, but that everyone would come to salvation. And, you know, so it's God's desire that even someone as wicked as Osama bin Laden, He would like for him to repent and to turn from his wicked ways. Because all wickedness, however large or small, is the same to God in the sense that it breaks His heart when we do something wrong. And He wants all of us to turn away from that and to turn to Him. So He gives us chances. And this says, you know, eventually the chances will possibly run out. Verse 2 says, when the righteous increase, the people rejoice. And that's just a general statement that, you know, when people are doing what is right, it causes good for everybody. When you do one thing good, that affects many other people, and in a good way. And people rejoice because righteousness is being done. And that's just a general rule for living, I guess you might say. Now let's go on to the next verses, because there's quite a few little sections here that they focused on this week. So the next section is verses 12 to 14. Let's read those. If a ruler pays attention to falsehood, all his ministers become wicked. The poor man and the oppressor have this in common. The Lord gives light to the eyes of both. If a king judges the poor with truth, his throne will be established forever. Okay, so in verse 12 it says, if a ruler pays attention to falsehood or lies, all his ministers become wicked. And, you know, it's almost like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? You know, if ministers see that their ruler is willing to listen to lies, then that encourages them, that the door is open to lie and get away with it. And so it's kind of a, you know, it kind of goes both ways, in my mind at least. But a ruler, you know, back in the day when Solomon ruled, a ruler's power was absolute. There was no one to vote him out of office. He ruled, and he could do, I mean, he had a free hand to do anything he wanted to. Basically, he made the decisions and passed those down, and they were done. And so it was quite different than the way we live now. And so with that absolute power, you can see how if you got a bad ruler in there like Ahaz, who was a wicked king, then everybody suffered because of that. And of course he would have had to have been supported by wicked ministers and a wicked support group in order to continue doing the wicked things that he did, because I think there still was the opportunity for people to stand up to him, and changes to have been made had other people not also been wicked along with him. And then in verse 13 it says, the poor man and the oppressor have this in common, or in some versions it says meet together. The Lord gives light to the eyes of both. I think this is a reference to the fact that regardless of your station in life, God reveals himself to you. That he gives light to your eyes. He helps you to see what's what, regardless of your station in life. And that is important, and it's a part of our Baptist doctrine to say that it's called the priesthood of the believer. In other words, not that we think we are all priests, but that we each are answerable for our own self to God in the choices that we make and the things that we do. And that we don't have to go through another person to get to God. We have that opportunity to receive enlightenment from God and to pray to God, and we can do that directly. We don't have to have another intercessor there, a priest or someone like that. Okay, and then the last verse says, a king who judges the poor with truth, his throne will be established forever. So if you have a ruler who does what is right, then the people are going to remember him forever. They're always going to look back and say he did things right and fairly, and he treated the poor in the way that he should have, and all of that. And he will be remembered forever. Now let's jump ahead to the next little section. This is verses 15 to 17. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child who gets his own way brings shame to his mother. When the wicked increase, transgression increases, but the righteous will see their fall. Correct your son, and he will give you comfort. He will also delight your soul. So again, this goes back to something that we've talked about not too long ago, that in order for a child to be happy and for you to be happy, you have to give them discipline or guidance. If a child is left to his own devices and has no guidance, then he's going to make childlike decisions and act in a way that is childlike, and he's going to be miserable because he is a child and he should not have to make those adult decisions. We as adults who know what is right have to guide our children. I'm sorry, I have a frog in my throat this morning. I hope you can understand me. I haven't taken up smoking or anything. And it will bring delight to us and to the whole family if we have a child that is taught to do what is right. The world has restrictions and rules, and as adults we have to follow those. And so we're not doing our children any favors by not teaching them that there are some limits to what they can and cannot do. Okay, and then the last bit talks about vision. And let's read verses 18 to 20. Where there is no vision, the people are unrestrained. But happy is he who keeps the law. A slave will not be instructed by words alone, for though he understands, there will be no response. Do you see a man who is hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him. So there's a couple things that I wanted to just touch on this section. One is that where there is no vision, the people are unrestrained. In other words, a leader, if he has nothing else to bring to the table, he must have vision. He must be able to take everything into account and try to look ahead and say, this is where we're headed, because he's leading a group, whatever group that is, and however big or small. If he has vision, then people have something to point themselves toward, and they can follow that vision with him. So a leader is only as good a leader, I guess, as his vision and those who follow him in that vision. That's important, because so many times leaders may get off track and begin to get bogged down in the details of leading, that they lose sight of where are we going with this. And it's very important. And then the second part of that, not to drag on, is where it says, do you see a man who is hasty in his words? Or your student book said, do you see someone who speaks too soon? There's more hope for a fool than him. And this gives you the idea of a person who maybe speaks without thinking. He's hasty with his words. He doesn't think it through before he begins to speak. That's one way of looking at it. And so it's warning against that. Another thing that came to my mind is a person who won't listen to others, only is hasty with his own words and bringing out his opinion, or trying to dominate the conversation without listening to other people and to the thoughts of others. And all of us can reflect on that and do better. I know I'm very bad about being a dynamic talker. I talk fast, and sometimes I tend to maybe speak too soon before the other person has finished what they were saying. And I try very hard not to do that, because I know that I tend to do that. But it says here that we're warned against such a thing. And a good example that came to my mind was when we lived in West Africa. We were supervisors of teams of people, and in the work that we did. And so at one point we had a group of 5 young ladies who came out. They were just out of college, and they came out to work with us, and they were a team. We had other people that we supervised, but this team of ladies. And there was one in particular that really did not want to be disciplined in any way, did not want to be guided, did not want to accept guidance very much at all. And one of the things that would happen is if you tried to say, now I want you to do it this way, this is the way we do this, and this is the reason that we do it, and this is how I want you to do it. She would say, I know, and she would cut you off. So you're in the middle of trying to explain whatever it was. I know. She already knew everything. And because of that, because she already knew everything, she did not learn anything. And did not bring joy to the team either. And so you can imagine that if you don't have room to learn, if you think you know everything, and this is this is something for all of us. When you get to a certain point in life, you may think that you've learned all there is to learn and you know it all now. So it can happen to an older person. It can also happen to a rebellious youth who thinks they know everything. It can be anybody along the spectrum. We always have something to learn, and especially we have something to learn from God. And learning to listen to God and not just tell God what we think the way things should be, and asking God to put his rubber stamp on it and bless us. That's not really the relationship that we need to have. We need to be able to learn to listen to God speaking into our lives, and then take that and discipline ourselves or guide ourselves by the direction that we've gotten from God, so that we do a better job as a Christian. So anyway, these are collections of Solomon's writings, and as we study through, there's something here for all of us. I appreciate you being with us this week. Appreciate those who are listening from week to week, and some of you make comments, but I know others of you are out there that don't necessarily make comments. When I first started doing this, it reminded me of when I was a little girl. There was a lady that used to come on the TV. I think her name was Miss Penny, and at the end of her program, she had the magic mirror. Some of you may remember that. She would look through the magic mirror, which was a mirror frame with a handle and no center, so you're seeing her face, and she's looking through and she's saying, "I see Mary, and I see Kathy, and I see Johnny." And it was like she was seeing us. And I was a little girl. I just believed that she could see me, even though she never did call the name Harriet, because of course, there are very few people who are named Harriet. But anyway, I do appreciate you being out there. And when I do the Sunday school lesson, I try to envision that someone is listening. And so I appreciate you very much from week to week that you are. And I'll see you next time.